Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? I want to start off by acknowledging that we live in very challenging times. And looking back to October of 2017, we thought that it probably couldn't get more challenging than it was then. Well, flash forward 2 years later, we were staring down not only a wildfire off to the northeastern section of our county, but also red flag warnings, power shutoffs in the midst of that wildfire. And I am honored to be joined today by some of the folks who were absolutely critical in making sure that our community stayed safe last fall and that we will stay safe into the future. I think that our community's been through quite a bit, and 2020 is certainly presenting us with a challenge as we look down the barrel at another wildfire season coming to Sonoma County, but this time in the midst of a pandemic. The good news is that we have some amazing subject matter experts who have been working tirelessly to make sure that we are prepared for a new reality and doing the best that we can to make sure our community will stay safe this summer and fall. With that, I would love to hand it over to Santa Rosa Fire Chief, as well as Ops Area Coordinator, Tony Gostner, to provide an update and a little bit of a presentation on current efforts.
Thank you, Linda. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. So as the operational coordinator, for everyone knows, it's through the office of OES. So OES has 6 regions. We're in region 2. Sonoma County is one of 16 counties. So it goes it's the coastal range from Del Norte all the way to Santa Cruz. And my main function as the operational area coordinator is to make sure that the mutual aid coming in and going out is what needs to happen for the fire season. So whenever there's a red flag warning, we are upstaffing through county funding or through state funding. And then those resources are again used within the county, immediate need to any adjacent county, and can be a resource throughout the state as we move forward. We really rely on mutual aid, as everyone's probably on this live Facebook show knows that, when wildfire hits and we have wind behind it, it's very devastating. And in 2017, 2019, we experienced that. We've experienced it our whole time here in Sonoma County, right? Going back to the early 1900s. So it's not a new thing. However, I will say that there are many, many more people in Sonoma County, which makes it challenging because we're all living in the wildland urban interface. And a lot of the land that we used to use as grazing and farmland is now grapes or just straight wild land. So as the operational coordinator, we're tied into many resources throughout our region. I will tell you, since 2017, we work directly with Contra Costa County and Alameda County and the bigger counties that have a lot of resources, where we will work around the system to get resources into our county under a mutual aid agreement rather than waiting for the system to play out. And we, in turn, as Sonoma County Fire Resources, we extend that offer to them. So if they have fires running into communities, we will send what we can to help until the larger scale of the fire resources shore up. I'll leave it there for now, and then we'll move on to the next panelist. And I got all kinds of information to share, but we'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. And now I would like to introduce Dr. Cindy Mace, our Public Health Officer, who is tasked with overseeing the public health crisis that we currently find ourselves in. And I know that she has been providing valuable information to our first responders to ensure that we are safe as we move into this wildfire season. Dr. Mace, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, hello, nice to meet everybody. I know some of you already from different conference calls and other things that we've had. So I am just in listening mode because I'm trying to understand better about the fire risks and what's being done specifically for preparation here in this county. I know that there have been some significant fires and that disasters that the county has dealt with. So I think I'm here more to learn from you how I can be effective and contribute towards the effort. In terms of disaster preparedness, as far as COVID is concerned, and then layering on top of that potentially a second disaster is something that we absolutely have to plan for. As you know, many of the mitigation measures that we've put in place for COVID are going to be hard to continue if there is actually a real a natural disaster like a fire. And I think that's where we need to start planning. If the two of them were to coincide somehow this summer, then we have a real issue. And so I'd love to hear from all of you who are much more knowledgeable about what to do in terms of a fire disaster, how we could somehow work in also some of the efforts we've made towards containing COVID at the same time. So I don't know, Supervisor Hopkins, if there's anything else specific that you wanted me to go into. I'm happy to discuss any other aspects of COVID, but I really want to learn more about what you're discussing here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I know that we will be asking you more questions. We do already have a couple questions from the audience that have come in and more that will be coming in via Facebook Live. And so I think that your expertise will be critical in answering some of those questions. But in the meantime, I will go ahead and hand it over to Sam Wallace, who is our Community Alert and Warning Manager at the Department of Emergency Management and has served us faithfully in the Emergency Operations Center. Sam has now seen us through a number of disasters, and I really appreciate his responsiveness to the community. Sam, would you like to share a little bit about the work that you've been doing? Oh, you're on mute. Let's see if we can get you unmuted.
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Supervisor, and also thank you to everybody who's participating in this today. It's important for us to all understand what's going on as we go into this very trying season. The Department of Emergency Management has been pretty busy over the last several months, obviously supporting the COVID-19 response, but starting about a month and a half ago, and realizing that we do have the possibility of having additional disasters that are going to happen in the midst of the COVID-19. We just understand it's not going to go away anytime soon. I wanted to highlight about the 4 or 5 particular areas that we're focusing on. The first one is that the importance overall of maintaining situational awareness through all this. We need to know what's going on as soon as possible so that we can get things moving as soon as possible. Just because of the COVID-19, as we'll go into a little bit when we get to sheltering, everything's going to take a little bit longer, so we need to get it started. Now, the good news is that we have a lot of systems that are in place that weren't for 2017. Most of you are probably familiar with the fire camera system that we have and we continue to upgrade. But in addition to that, we're going to be instituting some operational measures as we go into possible red flag events, upstaffing overnight and having people watching them. We're not sure exactly what that's going to be looking like right now, but we're going to be developing a very robust plan for that. That allows us to take us to the next step, which is, of course, alert and warning. We've done much better in alert and warning during disasters, especially during the Kincaid fire. We're going to continue that and expand it. For instance, we've just opened up communications with the various radio, television, and newspaper agencies to begin working out how we can better transmit the information in real time over their broadcast systems if and when we have ourselves a no-notice alert like we had during the Kincaid fire. We know that evacuation is going to be difficult, and so we are trying to build ourselves a more robust system for that. The Sheriff's Department, which actually has responsibility for evacuation, although we work very closely with them, is working on a predetermined evacuation map. So when we get that up and running, everybody will know what their zones are. So when we send out alerts in the middle of the night, we'll be able to reference that map and everyone will know kind of where everything is. Once we have that, of course, that also helps us determine how many people are going to be moving, which will help us to coordinate traffic control. And of course, something that's very near and dear to our hearts is we're going to have a better system for providing people that are mobility challenged with transportation during this. It's quite a heavy lift, but we're going to do everything that we can to have that functional. Once we have evacuated, the single biggest concern we have right now is in sheltering. During the Nuns Tubs fires, we had over 4,000 residents that had to seek sheltering in our congregate shelters, and it was about 3,600 for the Kincaid fire. And if anybody went through those shelters at the time, they were very packed. And obviously we cannot do something like that. So we've been working with American Red Cross, with various other agencies, including Cal OES, or California Office of Emergency Services, coming up with some new standards that will provide some protection versus transmission of diseases. Usually it's going to be spreading the shelters out, but we're looking at a lot of very non-standard, outside the box ways that we can provide sheltering for people, and ways that we can prevent transmission. For instance, there won't be a food line. We'll probably be handing out prepackaged meals so that there won't be any cross-contamination there. I won't go into the details because we're still digging down to it. We have one of our best emergency managers that is working on that plan right now. All of this is going to take a lot of coordination. And so what we are proposing right now and working on the detail is an evacuation coordination center. We understand that things are going to be moving very quickly in those first few hours. And we are going to put ourselves where we can do the most amount of good and get the right resources where they need to go and get the right information out to everybody so they can make the best decision. So that's about all I have. I'm happy to answer questions later on.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sam. And now I am happy to say that we are joined by our CAL FIRE Division Chief, Ben Nichols, who has been an asset not only in our major conflagrations that we've experienced in Sonoma County, but actually all of the time in assisting us with grant applications and trying to do preventive work here in Sonoma County to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire. Chief Nichols, would you like to join in?
Good afternoon, Supervisor Hopkins and the group. Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. Just wanted to continue the theme that's been put out there by Chief Gosner and company in that due to the dry and warm spring that we had this year, unfortunately, our predictive services are anticipating that we will hit critical fuel conditions a month earlier than a normal year. And so in a typical year in Sonoma County, we would expect to see critical live fuel moistures, the amount of moisture in live vegetation, hit those critical levels by July or August. By August or September. And so with the predictive services talking about a month sooner, that means that we have an additional month in which the vegetation on the landscape here in the county is more primed to burn. So we're anticipating at this point a July-August timeline where we end up into the critical fuel moistures while we're enjoying the rain that we've had the last couple of days. Unfortunately, the annual grasses have already turned and have started the curing process. So while the fire activity is going to lessen over the next several days and possibly into next week, depending on the continuation of storms, we are now entering into the heart of fire season. So with that, CAL FIRE is currently at our level 2 staffing level, which is 1 engine per battalion. We'll be bringing on the next wave of firefighters this coming Monday so that we can enter into level 3 staffing, which is 1 engine per battalion or 1 engine per station by Monday, May 25th. So that'll mean that there'll be 10 wildland engines, 9 wildland engines for CAL FIRE here in the county, followed shortly there behind by our fixed wing air tankers out of the Sonoma Air Attack Base. Those will be online by June 1. Up in Lake County with the bucket prior to the helitak crew being ready to go sometime in early June. To address those concerns about an earlier start to peak activity here in the county, I was working with TPW here last couple days to create a letter of support for opening up the the Vacation Beach summer crossing a month earlier. So hopefully that will help open up that route, that critical route into the south end of Neely Road faster than we would have otherwise been able to get in there. So we're looking forward to that. And so we're finishing out the winter here, making sure that the county is as prepared for fire season as we can make it. So we have an upcoming burn, an ongoing burn that we've been doing on the Jenner Headlands property up above Duncan's Mills, south end of Cazadero, that's reinforcing a strategically important fuel break there. Also, we spent the winter working with state parks to reduce the dead and down fuels out on the coast and in Armstrong Woods. And about a month ago, we did a community-based chipping project with the homeowners in the west side of Hacienda to help prepare their community for this coming summer. So any other communities that are looking for a community-based project, we're happy to engage that, just with the understanding that we're using engine companies to do that. And so depending on fire activity, we may or may not be able to take on too many more of those before we get into the heat of fire season. And just a snapshot for where we're at currently as we come into fire season. Currently, as of this week, for the state, we've had just over 1,100 fires, wildland fires. And so typically in a normal year, we have 953 fires. So we've had an interesting spring where we had a lot of fire activity early on because we weren't getting the rainfall. And then we got some storms that actually came in and put a lid on things for a bit, but now we're taking off again with 246 of those fires occurring in the past week by themselves. With that, I'm sure there's lots of other folks that would like to talk, but I'm available to answer any questions as they develop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And with that, I will hand it over to our board president of Fire Safe Sonoma, Roberta McIntyre.
Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins, for the opportunity to partner with you in this event. Fire Safe Sonoma, a little bit about that. I'm president and CEO of Fire Safe Sonoma. We incorporated in 1997, so we've been around for a while. We're the first Fire Safe Council in Sonoma County, and we serve as kind of like the overall umbrella Fire Safe Council countywide. In recent years, we've gotten very busy, especially since the fires back in 17 and around that era. Popularity or the interest in fire safety has grown quite a bit. With that said, our primary function is education and outreach throughout Sonoma County. And currently we have several projects in the works. We're doing a Ready, Set, Go project countywide that we're working on. We have a significant fuels reduction and education and outreach project we're collaborating with Transportation and Public Works on out in West County. And we just brought that footprint to include the community of Camp Meeker and Dental as well. We also typically do a lot of presentations. People ask us to do community presentations on fire safety. We just posted a advertisement for a webinar we're doing Monday the 18th on structural hardening with David Chu. Yeah, we've been around for a while. I've done a lot of work in the county, and we're here to partner with anybody who's interested in wildland fire safety. We also, just so you know, we also do a lot of work with local communities like your local COPEs, and we've helped local fire safe councils get themselves established and up and running. With that said, also I'll share with you, we've recently partnered with the California Fire Safe Council to do a pilot program to basically work with two communities, one in Sonoma Valley in the area of Oak Grove, and one in West County in the community of Occidental. We're using those two communities as prototypes to help them become fire safe councils, which they've done now, and also to help them craft their first CWPP, Community Wildfire Protection Plan. That experience will inform us and serve as a foundation or provide information for us to move forward with the California Fire Safe Council and create a statewide curriculum to present those materials to local fire safe councils to teach them how to start their fire safe council and then how to do their first CWPP, which really can often serve as their first strategic plan for their organization. Let's see what else. That's kind of it. I do want to share that we are a 100% nonprofit, all volunteer-based organization. We don't have sustainable funding. Our funding typically comes from grant projects we receive funding for. most of the time the funding we get through grants, very little can we direct towards overhead of our organization. So Carleon, I see, is on the panel. She has historically worked very hard with Fire Safe Sonoma. She's like our biggest cheerleader. She's like the face of Fire Safe Sonoma. She's done a lot of work on our behalf. And with that said, between her and I, we have historically done the bulk of the work voluntarily for Fire Safe Sonoma. So if you're looking for an organization to donate to, we're here receiving donations, and we need it to keep our doors open. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you. And now we will segue over to our Q&A portion. And I want to really thank Carleon Safford as well as Johannes for joining us for that section as well. And so I'm actually first have a question for our fire chiefs, and that is, what pandemic specific adaptations, what kinds of planning are you doing to make sure that your firefighters stay safe in the event of a major wildfire in the midst of the pandemic? And, are there other kinds of planning that you're currently sort of basically factoring COVID-19 into your wildfire preparation for this upcoming summer?
Yeah, thank you. This is Tony Gosner. I'll start. So I'm also the fire chief of the city of Santa Rosa. We've implemented a number of changes to the way we function due to COVID-19. Namely, we follow the good doctor's orders for masking in and around the stations, as well as temperatures, cleaning hard surfaces, things like that. So that's something that will continue moving on. As far as COVID-19 and the wildland fire season, it is going to be a challenge depending on how it all plays out. As you know, the virus is supposed to die down in the summertime and come back in the fall. That leaves us, when we have a fire and we build out camps, we have anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 to 6,000 people in those camps in a fairly tight footprint. And so that presents some challenges. So we'll probably take some temperatures, have a lot of hand washing stations. If you're sick, you're not going to be able to participate clearly, right? So if you do get sick, then we'll have to deal with that. But there has been a lot of preparation nationally as well as the stateside and locally. But right now I'll turn it over to Ben Nichols, who works with CAL FIRE, it's a state agency, and he has a little more information on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I'll reiterate what Chief Gosner put out there, that under the direction of Dr. Mace, we've been doing everything in our power to make sure that we don't have any spread of the virus in our ranks. So since the direction for the county as a whole has come down about facial covering, anytime our personnel can't maintain 6 feet of separation, they are to be wearing N95 masks or surgical masks to limit the cross-contamination. And then same deal with these regular maintenance of disinfecting surfaces and making sure that we're regularly checking temperatures to make sure that we can get personnel out of the general population as soon as possible to limit that spread of the virus. And once we're out fighting wildland fires, our general rule of thumb is to maintain 10 feet between firefighters so that we don't have injuries due to swinging hand tools and other objects on the fire ground. So on the fire line itself, we're not too anxious at this point, but as Chief Gosner said, when you're talking about thousands of people coming in from across the state and ultimately across the country and possibly internationally, once incidents get going, then it becomes an issue of how we keep those folks separated. So the department has been leaning in to figure out how we change business practices so that we don't have an outbreak in first responders on one of our large wildland fires out here in the state, to the point where remote briefings. So Supervisor Hopkins, you were able to come to the briefings at the Kincaid. That was a room full of firefighters shoulder to shoulder. That won't be happening this summer so that we don't have that community spread with somebody coming in that's been impacted by COVID-19. So details to follow, but we are making sure that we're doing everything in our power to make sure that we don't have spread amongst first responders when we bring together resources from across the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question I think is appropriate for Carrie Leon, which is what should residents be doing right now to prepare? What should our yards look like? What does it mean to be prepared in May of 2020 for the impending wildfire season?
It's a busy time for everybody, and I hope everybody's taken advantage of their extra at-home time to get a lot of their vegetation management work taken care of. I know I have been. You really want to start at the house and work out. That's the most important thing to do, is start at the house walls. Ideally, you have 3 to 5 feet of absolutely non-combustible right around the house. That is not a regulation, that's a recommendation. And then moving out to 30 feet, you want to keep that first 30 feet what we call lean, clean, and green. So you don't want any dead and dying materials in there. In there you want to limb up your trees so that fire can't use the trees as ladders to go up into the tree canopies or across the surface to buildings and structures. So really work in that 5-foot zone first, then your 30-foot zone, and then work out to 100 feet, which is an area where you can leave more of the natural vegetation. But what again you're after is what you want to do is get rid of the ground fuels and ladder fuels so that fire doesn't move up into the tree canopy or have a lot of fuel to move quickly across the surface of the ground. So just general fuels reduction. I would also recommend that everybody take a little time to bang around the internet and learn a little bit about what structure hardening is, because your home is about half the problem and the other half is the vegetation. So there's a lot you can do to harden your home against ignition, especially embers. And those are really what we all need to be thinking about. Defensible space is it's a fair amount of work, but it's the most important thing that you can do. What you do now and for the next month or so, at the end of the day, is more likely to save your house than even the firefighters are on the day of the fire. Because by doing that work, you make your home defensible so firefighters can get there and do the work that they need to do, while you're also actively reducing the risk that the fire can go across the landscape to your home. So those are the most important things you can do, is start working towards those ends.
Thank you so much, Carrie Leon. And I've got a couple questions from Vesta and Bruce that I think are best for Sam, which is, talk to us about evacuations with COVID protocols. Will hotels be open for wildfire evacuees during COVID? Now, you touched a little bit on some of the challenges presented, in terms of planning for evacuations, but maybe you could just respond as best you can to those questions.
I can't really answer on the hotels because I don't know whether they're going to be open or not. That falls kind of in Dr. Mace's territory. Obviously, if it would be in our best interest if we could have those hotels opened, because of course, when I mentioned the number of people that we had to shelter during Kincaid and Nuns Tubs, that was after we had just about every hotel room full. So I certainly hope that they are open. Otherwise, we're going to have a significant increase in our sheltered population, which will be very difficult for us. Was there another part of that question, ma'am?
Just generally sort of evacuations with COVID protocols. What are some of the things that you are, working on, or what comes to mind when you think about how you'll manage an evacuation in an era of pandemic?
Well, the evacuation piece, most of it is going to be, of course, self-evacuation in personal vehicles, although we are going to have a population that is going to need some kind of transportation to help them get out of there. And of course, anytime we do that, we can't necessarily cram them into a bus just like we. So we're going to be needing more transportation assets, and of course we need to be able to decontaminate transportation assets so it can immediately be turned around and put back to get more people. So that's kind of going to be a backdoor thing that we're going to be having to figure out and have a plan for ahead of time. As far as the rest of the evacuation, I think it's going to be fairly similar to past evacuations. Obviously, we have a lot of public safety agencies that will be involved, but they're already practicing good social distancing. They have their self-protection gear. Mainly what we want to do is we want to make sure that that evacuation goes swiftly so that we can get everybody out of the danger area, get them to hopefully friends or family for sheltering, the hotels, or failing that to get them into our modified congregate sheltering.
Thank you very much, Sam. And Dr. Mace, if you wanted to touch on the potential use of hotels during an evacuation as a way of providing more socially distanced shelter, if you have anything that you wanted to say in response to that question.
I think it's actually a really good idea because we do have a lot of hotels now that are unoccupied, as you know, and that could be a resource that could be used actually specifically given that they are unoccupied. Now, the state of California has also, entered into contracts and can do so with hotels for emergencies, specifically for disasters. For COVID itself, in fact, the state of California has a large budget for us to be able to enter into contracts with hotels for placing persons due to that emergency, but we could also potentially garner the same resources for an emergency such as a fire evacuation.
Thank you so much. And one, I was wondering if you might want to share a little bit about the alternative care site that we have stood up, which is obviously not specifically for a fire disaster, but which has provided that quarantine opportunity for residents in Sonoma County.
Yeah, and it could potentially, in the event that we did have a disaster such as a fire, be available for that use as well. Now, the alternate care site is at Sonoma State University, and as you know, there's lots of dorms there for students and some large gymnasiums. So we have been able to secure a contract with SSU to place our patients who are positive for COVID, who don't have other places to go, in that facility, and to place people who are still under investigation. In other words, they have symptoms or they've sent for a test and someone thinks that they do have COVID, their doctor or other provider, but they're pending the test. And so they can also go to the alternate care site to be there while they're waiting for their test results. So these are some ways in which we've been able to garner further support for isolating persons with COVID and quarantining those that are waiting for results. And I could absolutely see if we needed to use the site for non-COVID persons to shelter them, we could do that because the dorms are geographically located in such a way that the whole buildings are completely separate from other buildings. So if we had COVID positive people in one building, we could completely geographically separate them from COVID negative persons. So that is a potential great resource as well.
Thank you very much. If Johannes is still on the line, I have a number of questions coming in about weeds and vegetation and roadside mowing. There are also a few questions that are about parks, and I know that you are not the parks director, so we'll have to sort of save those for Bert. And there's actually some questions about City of Santa Rosa parks mowing as well. Could you give us an update on the status of roadside mowing and what your crews are doing to try to make sure that we do have that mowing along the side of the road and increased visibility for our vehicles?
Absolutely. Thank you, Supervisor Hopkins. I also like to thank Ben Nichols for his support on opening of Vacation Road seasonal crossing this year. We have been working on rethinking how we do operations when it comes to vegetation management, the installation of the seasonal crossings, evacuations, because the transit buses also provide transportation during evacuation. So with the buses, people are entering the bus through the rear door. We're also planning on fitting the buses with protection for the drivers, and we're setting patterns to sit the people in case of evacuations. When it comes to vegetation management, we have identified early on that it was one of the tasks that we could perform with social distancing while we were under the shelter in place. So we've been doing a lot of vegetation management from the Forestville yard and the Guerneville yard. We are currently working on Joy Road, Bidner Road, River Road, Quesadero Highway, and Annapolis Road. There's a lot of work going on vegetation management, opening routes, making sure that the routes that are typically used as evacuation or could be used as evacuation routes are cleared. In case there's any specific request, I advise that people use a SOCO reported or send us an email, and we'll be able to address all those vegetation management requests.
Thank you very much. I have a few specific questions from homeowners who are curious about how they can harden their homes more effectively. And I don't know if this would be best for Caroleon or Roberta, but either of you can jump in. Questions include, is there a way to harden or protect wooden decks or staircases from embers? Is decorative bark flammable? What should I prioritize in, that sort of close to the house section that you were talking about trying to clear?
So bark is definitely flammable, and any landscape mulch that you use, it's really best if you use non-flammable landscape mulches absolutely within 5 feet of the house. But really, it's a good idea to keep those flammable mulches at least 10, even to 30 feet away from the house. And near to the structure, you can use compost. You can use rock mulches. There's a variety of things you can do to preserve soil moisture that aren't as flammable as, say, wood chips or that horrible gorilla hair, that red stringy stuff, which is very, very flammable. So you definitely don't want that right up close to the house walls. One of the most important feature to harden your home is your roof. You want to check and see if your roof is of Class A construction. If it is, that means that it will withstand heat and burning items on it for about an hour. Most people, I find, don't really know exactly what their roof class is, and often you may have to consult with a roofer, get an inspection to figure out what your roof is constructed of. But that's really highly recommended because your roof is a big flat surface, thus highly vulnerable to ignition from embers. So that's an important place to start. Another really important place up at the top of the house are the vents that are used to keep moisture from building up in your attic and various places. The code for vents used to be 1/4-inch mesh, and a lot of houses out there still have 1/4-inch mesh on their vents. Now, if you try to imagine throwing a handful of birdseed through a 1/4-inch mesh, that's pretty easy to do. So you really need to replace those 1/4-inch mesh vents with a more ember-resistant material. There's several commercial products that are on the market that have been approved by the Office of the State Fire Marshal that are proven to resist both flame intrusion and embers, which blow into the house and then burn the house from the inside out. So that's another very important consideration. Near home combustibles, really keep an eye on that 5-foot zone. I keep on harping on that. That is something that is not part of state code yet, but there's a lot of conversation about making that one of the requirements of a regular inspection in the state responsibility area to have that 3 to 5 foot non-combustible. I think that's coming in the future. So the more you get started on working on that now, the better it is. And the reason that that's so important is that has been very demonstrably proven over incidents over the last 10 years to be the primary place where homes are, the primary source of ignition is probably within 5 feet of your house. So if you remove those flammable elements from that 3 to 5 feet, you do a lot more than you would think to prevent ignition in your house. When you're looking at that 3 to 5 foot zone, thank you for asking the question about mulch. That's a great question. But don't forget to look at your stuff. That's what I find when I'm out doing inspections for the county of Sonoma or whomever, is that people tend to see plants because plants of everybody's been talking to us about all these years are the plants, but they don't always see their stuff. So keep an eye on flammable items that are within that zone. Think about those furry sisal doormats, things like that. You might want to remove those or replace them from that area. Decks, make sure and keep them clean. So don't have a lot of flammable items on the deck during fire season. If it's a really bad day, like a red flag day, and you know it's a day to worry, take your cushions in before you leave for the day. Also close all your windows before you leave for the day on those red flag days. Just take care of places that make your house more vulnerable on those scary days. Also, do not please store flammable items under your deck. Your 5-foot non-combustible zone starts at the edge of the deck, so you don't want anything combustible under the deck. That's super important. As you move farther into a retrofitting, another important element are the windows. A single pane window that's made of annealed, not tempered glass will fail at a fairly early small temperature, low temperature. So if you have items that are on fire and radiant heat is blasting your house, a single pane annealed glass window is going to fail. It'll break, the glass will fall out, and then everything's going to come into the house and the house will burn. So if you can replace your windows with Wildland Urban Interface or WUI approved windows, which have 2 panes, one tempered, one annealed, that'll go a long way to improving your vulnerabilities. If you're wanting to do that piece by piece, look at where the vulnerabilities are. Where are the things that are going to be hot when they burn? Replace those windows first that are exposed to those risks. Finally, it's siding is a consideration because it's vertical. It isn't quite as high a priority of things to deal with, assuming it's in reasonable condition, as are flat surfaces where embers can pile up. If you have wooden siding, the most important thing to do is to make sure that you have at least 6 vertical inches of non-combustible space before the ground. So most houses have a cement sill, so make sure that the bark and all the stuff you're going to get rid of anyway hasn't piled up against the house siding. So give yourself 6 vertical inches up off the ground surface. And if you want to move towards replacing that siding, find a non-combustible product such as a fiber cement board or similar product to make that element. But start with the roof, go to the vents, decks, really get after that 3 to 5 feet. And those are the 6 priorities for structure hardening per Dr. Steve Quarles.
Thank you very much, Caroleon. I've got a number of questions here about PSPS and PG&E. So those public safety power shutoffs, what can we expect going into this summer? Obviously, none of us is a PG&E representative, so I will put that disclaimer ahead of time, but can anyone chime in with respect to what we might expect coming into the summer? Are we going to be seeing more PSPS events, and how can we deal with those in the event of a pandemic? How do we set up cooling stations, for instance, for folks? How do we set up charging stations? What should people be preparing to do to make sure that they are ready for those PSPS events? And I do have a couple of specific questions from folks who are having issues getting permits, and I will happily follow up with you if you send me an email, linda.hopkins@sonoma-county.org. If you're having challenges getting permits through Permit Sonoma, we can definitely address that. But I don't want to spend too much time on that. So does anyone, I don't know, Sam, if either the fire chiefs wants to jump in, Chief Gossner, are you leaning in?
Yeah, I'll start. So PSPSs are going to happen. We need to be prepared. So usually for us, it happens in the later part of the summer. That's when the vegetation is the driest and the weather conditions are such that we get those high north winds. So one thing that PG&E has been very vocal the last couple of times that I've been around them is the events will be shorter duration. They won't be as widespread. So they're doing everything they can to minimize the impact. With that being said, if your power went out last year, and mine did, just like everyone else's probably, be prepared, so you got to make sure that you have drinking water, you have enough food, you're able to maintain your medications, things of that nature. Now's the time to prepare for it. Don't prepare for it in October. Prepare for it now, and hopefully everything will work out to where it'll be minimized much more. But we really won't know that. You throw a PSPS and then a fire on top of it, like we had during the Kincaid, that has a whole nother host of issues. So there's a lot of personal responsibility that starts with us as individuals that live in this beautiful county of Sonoma. And that means we need to be prepared. So I'll leave it at that. Maybe Sam can add if he needs to.
I think you covered it pretty good, Chief. I know PG&E is working very hard to install systems to minimize the impact of the power shutdowns. Without getting too technical, basically they didn't have a good idea of how many switches needed to be thrown basically to turn off the power, but they're doing a much better job of that this time. They're also increasing their capability of doing line inspections. They have a very aggressive protocol that they're going to use so that as soon as the all clear is given that they can get the power back on. We're going to find out how effective those systems are once we come through our first power shutdown. Obviously, it's of grave concern to us because of all those things that happened as we saw doing an evacuation in the middle of a power shutdown. It affects our ability to warn people. It affects our ability to even move people on the streets if the power has shut down the stoplights. It's a very difficult thing. We learned a lot during the last power shutdown series, and hopefully we'll be able to assist everybody better this time.
Chief Nichols, do you have anything to add to the conversation surrounding PSPS?
No, just to tie into what Sam was talking about, that during the Kincaid, the decision to evacuate the lower Russian River when we did was based off of purely the fact that the power was going to be out that evening, and we wanted to make sure that we had reliable communication prior to that potential of the fire coming across the Santa Rosa Plain and getting out into the lower Russian River. Obviously, that was a larger event that we had the opportunity to plan for. Our concern is those day-to-day fires that we don't have the resources brought to bear at that point in time. So people being vigilant, getting NOAA radios to make sure that they've got access to non-traditional notification processes so that during those PSPSs, nobody is left without information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a quick question that I will answer from Quinn via Facebook. What are our community leaders doing about the homeless population? Would you consider these homeless camps a danger to public health as well as a fire danger? There were a couple of other questions about homeless camps and how they might be evacuated. Through the county, we have offered shelter to a number of homeless residents over at our alternative care site at Sonoma State University. We also did receive 10 trailers from the state, and those have been stood up and are now occupied over at the fairgrounds. I also understand that actually there might even be a virtual town hall about it tonight, that the city of Santa Rosa is moving forward with standing up a sanctioned encampment over at the Finley Center to provide relief for some of the unsanctioned encampments that are currently occupying the overpasses near downtown Santa Rosa. So I don't have any specific information on that because it's just what I've read in the paper and what I've heard from my colleagues on the city council, but there are plans in motion. And as Sam mentioned earlier, any kind of evacuation will need to sort of be not the big buses that we've used in the past, right? We're going to be having to look at, more, or it will be the big buses, but they'll be very socially distanced, right? We're going to have to be very thoughtful about how we move forward with evacuation. We did actually at yesterday's board meeting a pass and access and functional needs plan, which is in response to disasters to make sure that we take care of our unsheltered residents and other unique needs in our population. Dr. Mace, I don't know if you wanted to respond anything about, I know we have been proactive with respect to testing in the unsheltered population. I don't know if you have any comments that you want to add about our alternative care site or how we've been focusing on the homeless and unsheltered population in the midst of the pandemic.
Yeah, so we actually have been focusing on all vulnerable populations during the pandemic to ensure that we're performing surveillance to protect them and make sure that they're tested. If we were to find somebody who had COVID amongst these populations, that we could quickly respond. I'm very happy to say that in all of our surveillance in the homeless population, we haven't found anybody who's positive for COVID in the shelters, in the encampments. And so it's been a very successful surveillance program. The alternate care site is available for all persons who are positive with COVID. That would include anybody with undergoing homelessness as well.
Thank you so much. And our time is drawing to a close, so I have a great question that I think we can serve as a lightning round, and I will ask this to all of you. This comes from Nina via Facebook, and I'm going to tweak it a little bit. She asked, what are the counties and local cities doing during the shelter-in-place order to be proactive and doing preventive essential work? But I will ask this for you, for whatever jurisdiction you represent. How are you proactively preparing for wildfire season and proactively working to keep our communities safe? So feel free to use this as whatever last words you would like to share with the community. And I'll just go in order of what I can see on my screen. So starting with Roberta, and then Sam, and then Chief Gosner, Carleone, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so, you know, I've heard within this body of discussion so far a lot about vegetation management, et cetera, and a little bit about evacuation from those experts. But with regard specifically to the fire issue in front of us and that relationship with this pandemic we're dealing with, I really think it's most important to focus on the life issue with our residents. And for me, that means getting out there and reminding people that you really need to have your escape plan, your evacuation plan, your ready and go plan together. Be comfortable evacuating. Check with whoever you've already planned, assuming you have a plan. Check with the folks that you've worked with in regards to that plan, where you're going to stay, who you're going to connect with, and make sure that your relationship with those folks are such that they haven't been exposed and aren't quarantined somewhere, et cetera. So I think it's really important to look at our evacuation plans as individuals and make sure our contacts are updated so that not if, but when we have to leave, we're going to be connecting with people that aren't going to expose us, or we've taken precautions with that regard. Thanks so much.
I don't think I could say it much better than Roberta there. We have 500,000 residents in Sonoma County, and it's impossible for me to come up with a plan that takes care of everybody. We're very broad brush. Really what needs to happen is that individuals and families need to take a good hard look at their situation and come up with a plan that works for them. I have one. When the time comes, if we have to leave and find shelter, my wife and son are packed off and go to Davis to stay with my brother. Of course, I stay here. And everybody needs to have that plan. Let me put a plug in for socoemergency.org. We have a website, and there's a lot of resources there, including a downloadable fill in the blanks personal preparedness plan. If you haven't done it already, do that. And hopefully that'll get you to thinking of what you need to do, whether you have to shelter in place or whether you have to evacuate.
Yeah, for me, probably 65% of the city is working. That means the other large portion is not due to the shelter in place. So we're focusing on the high severity zones for weed abatement and vegetation management, trying to get the word out. Inspections don't start for us till fire season starts. That's June 1st. We can't go out and inspect properties now when people could, when they're supposed to be mitigated after June 1st. So I know there's a lot of angst out there as grass is turning and it is tall. So it's not only a little bit of a fire hazard in the medians, it is definitely a driving hazard in some areas. So the city's really trying to take a proactive approach of bringing people back to deal with some of those issues on the streets. I will say that where COVID comes in, a lot of the contracts that we had in place are no longer in place due to a few of the, whether it's COVID-19 or other issues. For me, late in summer, I can't, Sam Wallace nailed it. Go to SoCo Alert, sign up, make sure your cell phone is registered. Make sure you get a phone call, not a text, because when we start noticing evacuation, sometimes it's the middle of the night, a text will not wake you up. So make sure it phones your phone, and please make sure your phone is charged and you sleep with it in your bedroom somewhere. So if it does ring in the middle of the night, you can get the message to get out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mace, and then Carleone. If there's anything that you want to add in terms of preparation.
Sorry, I had to unmute there. Yeah, just really great to participate in calls like this. I think it's really good to hear how people are preparing or thinking about being prepared, especially when we already have the pandemic of COVID. I'm really looking forward to working with all of you moving forward and answering the general public's questions as to how we can be prepared. Because if it does happen, I think we'll have to mobilize and all work together to ensure that the community is safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mace. Carrie Leone, what would you like to add?
Sonoma Fire Prevention have been actively moving our inspection program forward for this year. I would really counsel everybody, if you get an inspection, that's your lucky day, because it's a really good opportunity for you to learn from an expert about the best steps that you can take to make your home compliant with regulations, but more importantly, to make your home compliant with wildfire, because that's what we really, really are interested in this process, is to, to put it on a viral scale, if we get community emergency, if you live in a community and every house in your community has done their defensible space and their structure hardening, the whole community becomes far, far safer, far more than every individual house would represent. So work with your neighbors, do everything you can do to really start working on all of those principles of defensible space that we would like to see happen out there.
Thank you so much. Johannes, what are you doing proactively to prepare?
Supervisor Hopkins, thank you. So we will continue to work on vegetation management. Excuse me. We are working on all our possible evacuation routes and our transit buses. During the fires, we'll be addressing opening and closing roads as required and management of traffic. And at the airport, we would be maintaining the operations going to support CAL FIRE.
Thank you very much. And that is a great introduction over to Chief Nichols. What would you like to share?
Thank you. I was just going to put out there that our defensible space inspection program starts up here Monday the 25th. COVID kind of set us back a little bit, but we're getting underway 2 weeks out from now. So the engines and inspectors will be out there working with the community to help give them the information to prepare their homes for those future fire events. And the fuels work where we can make the most impact and have that community support is where we're expending our limited resources that we have out there to get those community fuel breaks put in before we have those large fires. And just a reminder to the group that 99% of our wildfires here in the county are caused by humans in one form or fashion or another. And so if everybody does their part to be safe during those critical fire weather conditions, then hopefully we don't have those fires that ignite under those conditions that makes control and containment very difficult and experiencing those large damaging fires that we have. And to tie into what Roberta and Carol Leone were talking about, that have a plan ahead of time. And when you see the news clip on the nightly news about the red flag warning coming, take that time to make sure you've got your go bag or the things that you've decided you're going to take when the evacuation order comes. Do that quick lap around the house to make sure that leaves are cleared out of those gutters and prepare that house for the fire that could happen in the middle of the night, and you're not going to have time to do those things. So leaning in and being proactive to limit the loss of life and property down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. And one last quick question, Chief Nichols. You've mentioned, that if there are communities that are in high-risk areas, that sometimes there are opportunities to partner with CAL FIRE on risk reduction. How would someone go about learning more about CAL FIRE's programs or reach out if they have a project in mind?
So there's a lot of community groups out there that have created CWPPs and have been working with Roberta and Carol Leone. So they have that conduit to get to us if they've got a project that they want to tackle. But we've got a large process in front of us, and so we need to do the most impactful projects in the short order of time that we have prior to those fire events. So for my approach to our proactive work, we need to be working on the windward side or the east side of communities that have the largest potential for a major fire burning into them. So in Chief Gosner's neck of the woods, we're working on projects throughout the Mark West drainage to prevent those future fires from coming down into Santa Rosa. But obviously, if there's strategic lines that we can draw out in the east side of Rio Neto, Guerneville, Occidental, then we're all in. So Chief Lazarich, my Santa Rosa Battalion Chief, and Chief Turbeville, my Russian River Battalion Chief, are the two sources of information. Supervisor Hopkins, you have my information and Chief Turbeville's information. I can get you to Chief Lazarich's information, but we're happy to lean in and have that conversation with communities and landowners early and often.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And one last resource to mention, we do have a curbside chipper program available through the county. And actually the way to apply for that is through our SoCo Report It app. There's actually sort of a special little link that allows you to apply to be part of that curbside chipper program. And you don't actually need a curb to participate in the program. I recognize that a lot of unincorporated areas, there is no curb. So on that note, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Be safe, be well, and be prepared. And hopefully you have learned a little bit of something from this Zoom meeting if you are watching, and hopefully you are going to go and make sure that your go bag is ready, check out your defensible space, and support your local fire department, because they are our critical sort of first responders and our CAL firefighters as well. We would not be able to make it through our wildfire seasons without our fantastic first responders out there on the lines. So thank you all so much. Take care and have a good day.